The Divine Code reading for August 23rd, pages 153 and 154. We're in the chapter on which actions makes one liable for idol worship. Topic number 5. One who bows down to an idol is liable for this prostration. Whether he prostrates totally and spreads his hands and feet to the ground, or only puts his face to the ground. So a person is bowing down in front of an idol. If he's completely, with his hands totally out, when the first one would be like totally on the ground, his whole body is on the ground. The other one would be similar to an Islamic prayer where you see the person putting his hands on the ground and then he kind of bends towards and puts his forehead on the ground. And that's also done in the Jewish prayer on the high holidays. So either one of those are the ones we're talking about. The Rambam Laws of the Worship of Stars and Idols, 6.8. The liability for a capital sin is based on the similarity to the service of God, or service of God, and is not because it may be the traditional manner of serving an idol, as seen clearly in the explanation by Muri on Tractate Sanhedrin 60b. Through the manner of bowing mentioned in the Torah is a willful it is a full prostration. Even putting one's face to the ground is considered part of this prohibition. So either one of these two is the liability that's being spoken of here. But one who does not put his face to the ground, but only bends his head and body, is not liable to a capital sin unless it is the traditional manner of serving the idol. However, it is prohibited regardless. So other forms of bowing, just what we normally, in Western society, what we would consider bowing, just kind of bending forward, would not be this area of this this speaks of a person doing something that is not the normal way of serving the idol. He's doing this as a form of service, but it's not the normal way that people would serve the idol. If a person did do a bowing, just sort of from the waist, about tipping over a bow, if that's a normal form of prohibition, then that would also be, that's under a different halakha. That's under a different part of this. One who bows down to an idol, even for one moment, is liable once he puts his face to the ground. It appears clear from Rambam, Laws of the Worship of Stars and Idols, 6.8, that there is no specific length of time for bowing down to an idol. The liability applies even for one moment. Topic number 6. The prohibition of slaughtering to an idol includes both cutting the animal's throat, severing the back of the neck, or chopping the neck with an axe. So under the severing the back of the neck. So these are three different ways of what's considered slaughtering. Now, in the temple itself, in the regular temple service, the slaughter is from the front of the animal. You know, it's from the the front of the animal, the neck, and that's the normal what's called kosher slaughter. These other two forms would also be under the general category of slaughter and would also count. Slaughtering severing the back of the neck. We see that in Keshnef, Mishnah, Kinuk, Hilkot, Avodas Kohanim, 3:3. Chopping the neck with an axe. This is clear according to the ruling of Ravad, Laws of the Worship of Stars and Idols, 3:4. Tor, Shokanor, Yoredea, 139:4. That any method of killing that is similar to slaughter, that is any type of killing which includes cutting through the neck, for example, severing the head from the body, makes one liable and is included in the warning. That's in Exodus 22:19. One who slaughters sacrifices to the gods will be destroyed. So that's the inclusion of chopping the neck entirely, severing the neck. Whether the animal or bird, even non-kosher species, which are not acceptable for a Gentile to offer as a sacrifice to God on a personal altar. So Gentiles may sacrifice on a personal altar. Jews are not allowed to do this, but Gentiles may. It's not recommended because it's so complicated, but technically it's allowed. So a Gentile may sacrifice any kosher animal, except the ruling goes in this prohibition of sacrificing an animal in front of another altar includes any animal that would be considered sacrificing, which could be, you know, just any non-kosher animal that this rule could apply to. So the question is, what kind of animals would it apply to? And Tractate Avodah Zarah 51b brings a discussion between Rabbi Yehuda and the sages regarding slaughter of a locust for idol worship. That's when this is not the normal worship of the idol. So it becomes part of this category of the four forms of worship in the temple that are universally prohibited elsewhere, or universally prohibited for an idol. Rabbi Yehuda says that one is liable because it resembles slaughtering in the holy temple. The sages disagree, claiming there is no concept of performing this type of slaughter in the temple. Now, according to the Art Scroll commentary on this, the question is whether or not a locust has a neck. Rabbi Yehuda thought the locusts have a neck, and therefore slaughtering the locust would be severing its neck. The sages are saying, no, the locusts don't have a neck, and therefore slaughtering a locust would not be similar because it's not severing the neck. From this source, it is obvious. So that from the whole, you know, we're not really learning the technicalities of slaughtering a locust. We're learning principles that were brought into the Talmudic discussion. From this source, it is obvious that an animal that is missing a limb has the same ruling as a locus regarding the slaughtering for idol worship. So in the long Gomorrah on the subject, they're comparing the animal missing a limb. Since both are totally unfit for any sacrifice to God, whether in the holy temple or by a Gentile on a private altar. So as it applies to what we're reading here, this is a footnote, as it applies to the text, what we're reading here is a question of whether or not animals that would be unacceptable on a private altar for a Gentile on a private altar, and definitely on the temple altar, whether those animals could be included in the prohibition of sacrificing, or would it have to be an animal that would, because we're basing it on the temple, we're basing it on the four forms of temple service that are unacceptable in front of an idol under any circumstance. Would it have to be an animal that would be acceptable in a temple, or even acceptable on a private altar for a non-Jew? That's what they're trying to determine here. Rambam and the laws of the worship of stars and idols 3:4 rules like the sages, as explained by Keshnef Mishnah there. But Ra'avad argues, ruling like Rabbi Yehuda, Tor Shulchan Aruch Yeridea 139:4, rule according to Ra'avad. According to the later opinions, slaughtering a non-kosher animal for idol worship is completely like slaughtering a kosher animal that is missing a limb. The author, that's the author of the Divine Code, notes that possibly Rambam would agree in this case, and one is liable for this. So after we go through the long discussion regarding whether locusts have a neck, there seems to be the understanding that any animal that has a neck, because otherwise, what would be the purpose of figuring out this question about a locust? They're trying to figure out whether or not the locust has a neck. That's the argument in the Gemara between Rabbi Yehuda and the other sages. Therefore, we learn from that the question of whether or not the animal has a nick means that any animal with a nick would be in the prohibition. That's what's determined here. So regardless of whether or not a locust is, we know that if someone slaughtered a pig, severed a pig's head in front of an idol, that would be sufficient for being part of the prohibition. Even though nobody would ever slaughter a pig in the Holy Temple, that would be absolutely forbidden. But it would still be under the prohibition of slaughtering an animal in front of an idol. Each one of these methods is included in sacrificing to other gods, and one is liable for any of these. One who sacrifices an animal that is missing a limb or a locust to an idol is liable for a capital sin, even if this is not the traditional manner of its service, that is, sacrifice of an idol or a locust. So it's not normal to sacrifice an animal missing a limb or a locust. It's not normal to do that in front of this idol. But because it resembles one of the four. It's under the general category of one of the four temple services that it would be it would still be capital sin because of that. Ravad, Tor, Shokanork, Euridea, 139.4. It is also clear from these sources that slaughtering an animal with a missing limb has the same rule as slaughtering a locust. So those are right. So if it's missing a limb or it doesn't, if it's a locust, that would be both would be included in this prohibition. One is also obviously liable for sacrificing an animal that has a physical blemish, but not missing a limb. So in the pecking order, in the categorization of animals, in a temple service, the animal has to be like perfect, or in the category of perfect. That means there's no like physical blemish. A cut to the ear, where it's sliced a little bit, would be considered a physical blemish that would disqualify the animal. That's on the level of temple service. In the level of a on the level of a private altar by a non-Jew, the blemish that's like the cut to the ear, where the ear is sliced, the earlobe is sliced, would not be a disqualification. The animal would still be allowed, but if the animal is missing a limb, that would disqualify the animal. So it's a different level of acceptability. In this regard here, because we're allowing the limb, which is more stricter, therefore the less strict physical blemish would not disqualify the animal. This goes according to all opinions. This includes Rambam, who differentiates between an animal missing a limb, as explained in the earlier footnote, which is not fitting to be offered to God by a Gentile on a personal altar, and an animal that merely has any other type of blemish, which is acceptable for sacrificing to God by a Gentile on his private altar. Slaughtering other species of insects, such that those that have a nick that connects the head to the body, such as locusts, and there's certain types of locusts that have necks and other types of locusts that don't. So that you have to ask a rabbi to explain which one is which. But not those whose head and body are one piece, or reptiles, amphibians, etc. So reptiles and amphibians, they have necks. Has the same ruling as that of a locust. And I would assume that the locust being described here is the type that has a neck, because there's different types of locusts. The Talmud, Tractate of Avodah Zarah 51a, implies that any creature with a neck has the same ruling as an animal. And by animal, I assume that means a mammal. In regard to forbidden sacrificial slaughtering for idol worship. And this will be gone into more detail and in a future section. Thank you.